When Sarah Mitchell pulled into the Flying J rest stop off Interstate 40 near Amarillo, Texas, on a scorching Saturday afternoon in late July, she was thinking about nothing more complicated than coffee and stretching her legs after 3 hours behind the wheel. She was driving from Albuquerque back to Oklahoma City after visiting her sister, fighting through the kind of dry heat that made the highway shimmer and turned the landscape into a bleached monotone of scrubland and sky. Sarah was 52 years old, a middle school English teacher with 28 years in the classroom, graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of observant nature that came from spending decades reading the faces of 12-year-olds who were trying to hide everything from test anxiety to family crisis. She'd learned long ago that children rarely said what they actually meant, that their real messages came through in gestures, in the way they held themselves, in what they didn't say as much as what they did. The rest stop was crowded with the usual Saturday traffic, families on road trips, truckers grabbing meals, travelers making the long haul across the Texas Panhandle. Sarah parked her Honda Civic near the building, grateful for a chance to get out of the air conditioning that had been blasting directly on her face for hours, and walked toward the entrance. The heat hit her like a wall, that particular Texas summer heat that felt aggressive and personal, and she moved quickly toward the glass doors and the promise of climate control inside. She was halfway to the building when she saw them, a man and a girl walking from a dusty white Dodge pickup toward the restrooms. The man was maybe 40, average height, wearing jeans and a faded Dallas Cowboys t-shirt, baseball cap pulled low over his face, the kind of completely unremarkable appearance that would make him invisible in any crowd. The girl beside him was small, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with long dark hair and a ponytail, wearing jean shorts and a pink tank top, flip-flops slapping against the concrete as she walked. Sarah's feet slowed without her consciously deciding to stop. Something about the girl's posture had triggered that teacher instinct, that radar that had been honed over nearly 3 decades of watching children. The girl was walking with her shoulders pulled forward, her head down, her arms wrapped around her midsection in a protective gesture that Sarah had seen 1,000 times before. It was the posture of a child who was trying to make herself smaller, who was carrying something heavy that she couldn't name. The man's hand rested on the girl's shoulder, not violent, not obviously wrong, but with a weight that looked like control rather than comfort. Sarah told herself she was being paranoid, that road trips made everyone look tired and uncomfortable, that not every child with slumped shoulders was in danger. She kept walking toward the building, but her eyes stayed on the pair ahead of her. They reached the restroom entrance and the girl turned slightly, adjusting the strap of the small backpack she was carrying, and Sarah's world tilted sideways. She knew that face. Even with the downturned expression, even with the shadows of exhaustion, she knew those features with absolute certainty. Emma Grace Sutton. Sarah had taught her 4 years ago, when Emma had been a bright, chatty 7th grader at Lincoln Middle School in Oklahoma City, a girl who loved reading fantasy novels and wrote poetry in the margins of her notebooks, and talked about wanting to be a veterinarian someday. Sarah remembered her clearly, because Emma had been one of those students who made teaching worthwhile, who asked questions that showed she was actually thinking, who turned in assignments that revealed a creativity and depth that most kids that age hadn't yet developed. Sarah also remembered that Emma's home life had been complicated, that her mother had struggled with substance abuse, that there had been CPS involvement at one point, that Emma had missed weeks of school during a custody dispute between her mother and grandmother. Sarah's teaching brain was racing through calculations. Emma would be 15 now, maybe 16. Definitely high school age. Definitely not the age where she should be traveling alone with a man Sarah had never seen at any parent-teacher conference or school event. The protective posture made more sense now, recontextualized as something darker than simple road trip fatigue. Sarah changed direction without thinking about it, moving toward the restroom entrance, her teacher instincts shifting into the mode that had made her call CPS 3 times over her career, the mode that prioritized a child's safety over social comfort or the possibility of being wrong. She reached the restroom door just as Emma was going inside, the man waiting outside with his arms crossed, looking at his phone with the casual patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Sarah went into the restroom and found Emma standing at the sink, washing her hands with the kind of slow, deliberate movements that suggested she was killing time rather than actually cleaning. The girl's reflection in the mirror showed red-rimmed eyes and a face that was thinner than Sarah remembered, cheekbones more pronounced, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of stress held long-term. Sarah moved to the sink beside her, washing her own hands, watching Emma's face in the mirror, waiting for recognition. It came slowly, Emma's eyes lifting from her own reflection to Sarah's, confusion shifting to surprise, shifting to something that looked desperately like hope. "Miss Mitchell," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was something in the way she said it that confirmed every alarm bell ringing in Sarah's head. The girl's eyes darted toward the door, toward where the man was waiting outside, then back to Sarah with an expression that was asking a question she couldn't voice out loud. Sarah made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She kept her voice calm and quiet, the same tone she used in her classroom when she needed a student to trust her with something difficult. "Emma, honey, are you okay? Who's the man you're with?" Emma's face crumpled slightly, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling, her hands gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles went white. "That's Travis," she said, and her voice cracked on the name. "He's my mom's boyfriend. He said Mom sent him to pick me up from my grandma's house in New Mexico and drive me back to Oklahoma City. But something doesn't feel right. He won't let me use my phone. He said it's broken, but I don't think it is. And he keeps saying we're going to Oklahoma City, but we've been driving for hours, and this doesn't feel like the right way." Sarah felt ice spreading through her chest despite the Texas heat outside. She knew with absolute certainty that this was wrong, that whatever story Travis had told Emma was a lie, that a teenage girl traveling alone with her mother's boyfriend across state lines without being allowed to contact anyone was a situation that screamed danger in every possible way. "Emma," Sarah said carefully, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was hammering, "I need you to trust me right now. I'm going to help you, but I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, tears finally spilling over, running down her cheeks in silent tracks that she wiped away quickly with the back of her hand. Sarah pulled out her phone, keeping it low and out of sight from anyone who might glance through the door. "I'm going to call for help," Sarah said. "When we leave this restroom, I want you to stay close to me. If Travis asks questions, tell him I'm an old teacher and we're just catching up. Can you do that?" Emma nodded again, her breathing coming faster now, panic and relief fighting for control of her expression. Sarah dialed 911, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and when the dispatcher answered, she kept her voice low and calm and clear. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a teacher from Oklahoma City, and I'm at the Flying J rest stop off Interstate 40 near Amarillo, Texas. I have a former student with me, Emma Grace Sutton, 15 years old. She's traveling with a man named Travis, who claims to be her mother's boyfriend. The girl says she was picked up from her grandmother's house in New Mexico, but hasn't been allowed to use her phone, and doesn't believe they're actually going where he says they're going. I believe this is a possible abduction or trafficking situation, and I need police here immediately." The dispatcher's voice sharpened with focus. "Ma'am, stay on the line. Are you and the girl in a safe location right now? We're in the women's restroom. The man is waiting outside. I'm going to try to keep Emma with me, but I don't know how he'll react when we don't come out together. Officers are being dispatched to your location now. They're approximately 6 minutes out. Can you describe the man and the vehicle?" Sarah repeated everything Emma had told her, added physical descriptions, mentioned the white Dodge pickup with New Mexico plates that she'd seen them arrive in, gave the dispatcher her own information and phone number. The dispatcher's voice was steady and professional. "Miss Mitchell, when you leave the restroom, try to stay in a public area with witnesses around. Don't confront the man directly. Our officers will handle that when they arrive. Your job is just to keep Emma safe and visible until help gets there." Sarah acknowledged the instructions and ended the call, then turned to Emma, who was watching her with an expression that mixed terror and desperate trust. "We're going to walk out of here together," Sarah said quietly. "We're going to go to the food court area where there are lots of people. If Travis tries to separate us, I'm going to make a scene. I'm going to be very loud and very public, and I'm not going to let him take you anywhere alone. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, wiping her face one more time, straightening her shoulders in a visible effort to compose herself. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Miss Mitchell. I trust you. They walked out of the restroom together, and Sarah's eyes immediately found Travis, who was still standing near the entrance, still looking at his phone. But his posture had shifted slightly when he saw them emerge together. His expression moved through confusion and calculation, landing on forced pleasantness that didn't reach his eyes. Emma, who's your friend, he said, and there was an edge underneath the casual tone that made Sarah's skin crawl. This is Miss Mitchell, Emma said, and her voice was steadier than Sarah had expected. She was my teacher in 7th grade. We were just catching up. Travis's smile didn't waver, but his eyes were assessing Sarah with the kind of evaluation that made her feel like prey being measured by a predator. That's nice, he said. We need to get back on the road, though, Emma. Say goodbye to your teacher. Sarah stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between Travis and Emma in a movement that looked casual but was absolutely deliberate. Actually, Sarah said, and she let her teacher voice carry authority that decades in the classroom had perfected, Emma and I were just talking about grabbing some food. I haven't eaten since breakfast, and I'd love to catch up more while we eat. You're welcome to join us if you'd like. Travis's smile tightened, and Sarah saw his eyes flick toward the parking lot, toward his truck, calculating distances and options. That's real kind of you, he said, but we're on a schedule. Emma's mom is expecting us back in Oklahoma City tonight. We need to get going. Sarah didn't move, didn't step aside to let him reach Emma. She felt the girl's hand grip the back of her shirt, a small gesture hidden from Travis's view, but communicating volumes about how much Emma did not want to leave with this man. Well, Sarah said pleasantly, keeping her tone light and friendly and absolutely immovable, I'm sure her mother would understand if you're a few minutes late. It's not often you run into a former student in the middle of Texas. Emma, honey, what sounds good to eat? Travis's pleasant expression was fracturing now, irritation bleeding through the edges. Lady, I appreciate you caring about Emma, but this really isn't your business. We need to go. Sarah saw people around them starting to notice the tension, saw a woman with 2 kids glance over curiously, saw a truck driver pause near the door. Sarah raised her voice just slightly, just enough to make sure those nearby could hear clearly. Emma, Sarah said, keeping her eyes locked on Travis, did you tell your grandmother you were leaving with Travis? Did she know you were going today? Emma's voice was small but clear. No, Miss Mitchell. I told Grandma I was staying another week. I was supposed to call her when I got to Mom's house, but Travis took my phone and said it wasn't working. Sarah saw Travis's jaw tighten, saw his hand move slightly toward Emma, and she stepped fully in front of the girl, her body language shifting from friendly teacher to protective barrier. The woman with the kids was openly staring now, her expression concerned, and the truck driver had stopped completely, watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. Travis, Sarah said, and she dropped the pleasant tone entirely, letting steel show through. The police are on their way. If Emma's mother really sent you to pick her up, if this is all legitimate, then you won't mind waiting to explain that to the officers. But Emma is not leaving with you right now. She's staying with me until law enforcement arrives. Travis's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, shock and anger and calculation, and something that looked like panic. He took a step forward, and Sarah felt Emma's grip on her shirt tighten, felt the girl press closer against her back. You can't do this, Travis said, and his voice had lost all pretense of friendliness now. You can't just take someone's kid. She's not your kid, Sarah said flatly, and her voice carried across the space, making sure everyone nearby could hear every word. She's my former student who told me she doesn't feel safe, who told me she wasn't supposed to be on this trip, who's been denied access to her phone, who doesn't know if her family knows where she is. So yes, I absolutely can keep her with me until police determine whether this situation is legitimate. Travis's hand moved to his pocket and Sarah's entire body tensed, her mind racing through possibilities of what he might pull out, but it was just his phone. He held it up toward Emma, his voice taking on a pleading quality that sounded practiced and false. Emma, call your mom right now. Tell her what this lady is saying. Tell her it's not true. Emma shrank back against Sarah, shaking her head. You said my phone was broken. You said I couldn't call anyone until we got to Oklahoma City. Use mine then, Travis insisted, but he didn't move closer, didn't extend the phone toward them, and Sarah noticed his thumb was moving across the screen like he was deleting something or changing something before making any call. The truck driver who'd been watching moved closer, a man in his 60s with gray hair and a weathered face that suggested decades on the road. "Everything okay here?" he asked, directing the question to Sarah but keeping his eyes on Travis. His presence was calm but substantial, the kind of backup that came from someone who'd seen enough of the world to recognize when a situation wasn't right. Sarah felt gratitude flood through her. "This gentleman and I are waiting for police to arrive," she said clearly. "There's a question about whether this young lady has permission to be traveling with this man, and we're going to let law enforcement sort it out." The truck driver nodded slowly, positioning himself at an angle that blocked the most direct path to the exit. "Sounds reasonable to me," he said. Travis looked between Sarah and the truck driver and the woman with kids who was now on her own phone, clearly calling someone, and whatever calculation he was running came up with an answer he didn't like. His expression shifted one more time, landing on something that looked like desperation mixed with anger. "This is kidnapping," he said, pointing at Sarah. "You're kidnapping that girl. I'm calling the cops myself." Sarah's voice was absolutely steady. "Please do. I already called them 6 minutes ago. They should be here any moment. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing your explanation for why a 15-year-old girl who was supposed to be at her grandmother's house in New Mexico is instead traveling across Texas with you, without her phone, without her family knowing her location." Travis's eyes darted toward the exit again, toward the parking lot, and Sarah saw the exact moment he made his decision. He turned and walked quickly toward the door, not quite running, but moving with purpose, and the truck driver moved to follow him. Sarah pulled Emma closer, keeping the girl tucked against her side, watching through the glass doors as Travis reached his white Dodge pickup. He got in, fired the engine, and pulled out of the parking space with enough speed to make the tires squeal slightly on the hot pavement. The truck driver was already giving someone on his phone the license plate number, describing the vehicle, pointing as Travis headed toward the interstate entrance. Sarah's phone rang and she answered to hear the 911 dispatcher's voice. "Miss Mitchell, officers are pulling into the rest stop now. They have the description of the vehicle you reported. The suspect just left the location heading east on Interstate 40. Highway Patrol has been notified and is pursuing. Are you and Emma still safe?" "We're safe," Sarah confirmed, and her voice shook slightly for the first time. "The girl is with me. Travis left when he realized we weren't going to let him take her." 2 Amarillo Police Department cruisers pulled into the parking lot with lights flashing, and Sarah felt Emma start crying in earnest now, the tears she'd been holding back finally breaking through as the reality of safety made it possible to fall apart. Sarah wrapped her arms around the girl, this former student who she'd taught about metaphors and character development and essay structure 4 years ago, who she was now holding together while she sobbed out fear and relief and trauma that Sarah suspected went deeper than just today's drive across Texas. Officers approached and Sarah explained everything while Emma clung to her, the whole story from recognizing her former student to the conversation in the restroom to Travis's behavior and eventual flight. The officers took notes, made calls, coordinated with Highway Patrol, and within 20 minutes they had confirmation that Texas state troopers had pulled over a white Dodge pickup matching the description, that Travis was in custody, that he had an outstanding warrant in Oklahoma for child endangerment from a previous case. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, knelt down to Emma's level. "Honey, we need to contact your family. Can you tell me who we should call first?" Emma wiped her face, her voice still shaky. "My grandma, Sharon Sutton. She lives in Albuquerque. She thinks I'm still at her house. She's going to be so scared when she finds out." The officer nodded gently. "We'll call her together, and we'll explain that you're safe and that you did everything right. You told an adult you trusted. You asked for help. That took real courage." Over the next hour, while they sat in the rest stop's dining area with officers coordinating family contact and CPS involvement, Sarah pieced together more of the story. Emma's mother had relapsed again, had lost custody to Emma's grandmother 6 months ago. Travis was a boyfriend who'd become increasingly controlling, who'd apparently decided to take Emma from her grandmother's house by showing up and claiming he had permission from Emma's mother to transport her. Emma had believed him at first, had gotten in the truck thinking her mother had sent him, but as the hours passed and he wouldn't let her call anyone and the route seemed wrong, her fear had grown until seeing Miss Mitchell had felt like a miracle. Emma's grandmother arrived 4 hours later, having made the drive from Albuquerque at speeds that probably violated several traffic laws. She was a woman in her late 60s, with Emma's same dark hair, now heavily streaked with gray. And when she came through the door and saw Emma, the sound she made was something between a sob and a prayer. Emma ran to her, and they held each other while both cried. And Sarah had to look away because watching that kind of reunion broke something open in the chest and rebuilt it at the same time. Sharon Sutton eventually approached Sarah with tears still streaming down her face. "You saved my granddaughter," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "That man, if he'd gotten her across state lines, if he'd taken her somewhere I couldn't find her." She couldn't finish. Sarah hugged this woman she'd never met, this grandmother who'd been trying to give Emma stability and safety in the chaos of her daughter's addiction. "I just paid attention," Sarah said quietly. "Emma's a remarkable young woman. She was brave enough to tell me something was wrong. The investigation that followed revealed that Travis had a history of similar incidents, that he'd been targeting vulnerable families where mothers were struggling with addiction, gaining their trust and then attempting to take their children for purposes that made Sarah feel sick when the detective explained the suspected trafficking connections. Emma's case had interrupted something that could have ended in ways too dark to fully contemplate. The detective who handled Emma's interview told Sarah later that her quick action and willingness to cause a scene, to be loud and public and insistent, even when Travis tried to make her back down, had likely saved Emma's life, and possibly broken open an investigation that would help other children. Sarah stayed in Amarillo overnight, making sure Emma was settled with her grandmother, giving her statement to multiple law enforcement agencies, coordinating with Oklahoma authorities who needed information about Emma's family situation and her mother's involvement or lack thereof in Travis's plan. Before Sarah left to continue her drive back to Oklahoma City the next morning, Emma asked if she could talk to her alone for a moment. They sat in the lobby of the hotel where Sarah had stayed overnight. Early morning sunlight streaming through the windows, Emma looking less fragile than she had yesterday, but still carrying visible shadows of what she'd been through. "Miss Mitchell," Emma said quietly, "I need you to know something. When I saw you in that restroom, it was the first time in hours that I thought maybe I was going to be okay. I'd been praying for help, asking God to send someone, and then you were just there." Like an answer, Sarah felt her throat tighten. "You helped yourself, Emma. You were smart enough to recognize something was wrong. You were brave enough to tell me. You trusted your instincts. I just listened when you were asking for help." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. "My counselor at school last year, before I moved to Grandma's, she told me to trust adults who'd proven they were safe. You were always safe. You always listened when kids had problems." I remembered that yesterday. I remembered that you were someone who paid attention. That phrase stuck with Sarah on the drive home, on the long, straight highway through the Texas Panhandle, where the landscape was so flat and empty that you could see for miles in every direction. Paying attention. That was what it came down to, really. Not some dramatic, heroic action, not special training or credentials, just the simple act of looking at a child and actually seeing them, noticing when something was wrong, being willing to trust that instinct even when it was easier to look away and tell yourself it wasn't your business. Sarah thought about all the people at that rest stop who'd probably seen Emma and Travis and noticed nothing, who'd been too focused on their own trips and their own concerns to register a young girl's distress. She thought about how close she'd come to doing the same thing, to walking past them into the building without that second glance that had triggered recognition. She thought about how many children were probably in situations right now where they were trying to signal for help in small ways, hoping someone would pay enough attention to notice. When Sarah got back to Oklahoma City, she contacted Emma's grandmother and asked if she could stay in touch with Emma, if it would be helpful for Emma to have that connection to someone outside family who'd been there during the crisis. Sharon agreed immediately, grateful that Emma would have another supportive adult in her life. Over the following months, Sarah and Emma talked regularly. Emma started therapy to process the trauma of the abduction attempt and the longer trauma of her mother's addiction and the instability that had defined too much of her young life. She told Sarah during one of their calls that the therapist was helping her understand that being scared didn't mean being weak, that asking for help was smart rather than shameful, that adults who dismissed children's concerns were the problem rather than children who spoke up. Sarah watched this young woman who she'd taught about literary devices 4 years ago learn to rebuild trust in the world and in her own judgment about danger and safety. Emma's mother eventually completed a treatment program and regained supervised visitation, but custody remained with Emma's grandmother. Travis was convicted on multiple charges, including attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, and based on evidence found during the investigation, trafficking-related offenses that would keep him in prison for years. The case was used in training for both law enforcement and teachers in the region, an example of how civilian intervention and willingness to trust instinct could interrupt criminal networks that counted on bystanders looking away. Sarah was asked to speak at several professional development sessions for educators about recognizing signs of trafficking and abuse, about the importance of maintaining relationships with former students who might one day need someone safe to turn to, about trusting your gut when something felt wrong, even if you couldn't articulate exactly why. 1 year after the rest stop incident, on a warm July afternoon, Emma came to visit Sarah at her home in Oklahoma City. She'd just turned 16, had gotten her driver's license, was doing well at her new high school in Albuquerque. She'd brought something with her, a framed piece of art that she'd created in her art class, a mixed media piece showing a rest stop with a small figure and a larger figure, with text woven through the image in Emma's careful handwriting. The text read, "Sometimes safety looks like a familiar face in an unfamiliar place. Sometimes rescue looks like a teacher who pays attention. Sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph is one person willing to cause a scene because they trust what they see more than they fear being wrong. Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen." Sarah hung the piece in her living room where she saw it every day, a reminder of why teaching mattered beyond curriculum and test scores, why building real relationships with students created safety nets that might catch them years later when they fell. Emma graduated high school 3 years later with honors, planning to study social work in college with a focus on helping children in foster care and unstable family situations. She told Sarah during her graduation party that the experience at the rest stop had changed what she wanted to do with her life, had made her understand viscerally that vulnerable children needed adults who would fight for them, who would believe them, who would be willing to stand between them and danger even when it was uncomfortable or risky. Sarah attended Emma's graduation, watched this young woman who she'd taught in 7th grade, and then saved in a Texas rest stop walk across the stage with confidence and purpose, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for decades. Every teacher had moments of wondering if they made any real difference, if their work mattered beyond the classroom walls. Sarah had her answer now, framed in her living room and walking across that graduation stage, proof that sometimes the most important lessons weren't about literature or writing, but about paying attention and trusting your instinct to protect. The story of Emma and the rest stop became something Sarah shared when people asked why she still taught after nearly 3 decades, why she hadn't retired to something easier and less exhausting. She told them about a 15-year-old girl who'd needed help and had been brave enough to ask for it, about the split-second decision to trust instinct over social comfort, about how one person paying attention could stop a nightmare in progress. She told them about the responsibility that came with working with children, the obligation to be someone safe and watchable even years after a student left your classroom, the importance of being willing to cause a scene and risk looking foolish if it meant a child went home to family instead of disappearing into systems designed to make people vanish. She told them that teaching was about building trust over time so that when crisis came, children knew who to turn to, who would believe them, who would act to protect them. If you've ever looked at a situation and felt that something was wrong, even when you couldn't name exactly what triggered that instinct, if you've ever wondered whether to speak up or stay silent when a child seems uncomfortable or afraid, this story is a reminder that paying attention matters, that trusting your gut when something feels off could save a life, that being willing to make a scene and be loud and insistent when a child needs protection is never the wrong choice. The people who hurt children count on bystanders looking away, on adults being too polite to intervene, on everyone minding their own business while vulnerable people suffer. Every person willing to pay attention, to take children seriously when they signal distress, to stand between danger and innocence even when it's uncomfortable, becomes part of the solution that brings children home safe and stops predators from succeeding. Emma's courage to tell a trusted adult something was wrong, and Sarah's willingness to believe her and act immediately proved that rescue doesn't require special powers or training, just awareness and the decision to prioritize a child's safety over social comfort, and that sometimes the most heroic thing any of us can do is simply pay enough attention to see someone who desperately needs to be seen.